Yeah, I was able to join. I had to use my second favorite browser.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I won't say what it was, but it's also a good browser. It's called Firefox.
When is this?
I love Chrome. I love Edge. Just saying. Okay, I think I can make this work. We're having some technical problems, and hopefully this works. Okay.
I think you need to go to presenter. I think try the whole screen. That's buggy.
I think it's buggy.
That's buggy.
Let me try this.
Woo!
Cool. Looks a little weird, but we'll go with it. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. This is super exciting for me. I'm super happy that I was able to come here from Portland. I'm actually from Seattle, so this was kind of coming back home for me. But before I start, I wanted to really thank Yana for all her hard work. This has been pretty quick that she's got this going. I saw something in maybe like Polymer's chat, and then a couple months later, this is our first meetup. So a ton of work has gone into it. Really appreciate all her help, and we should really give her a round of applause. So I'm Jordan, and I am as was mentioned, senior software engineer. That's my official title, but really I'm a web developer. I am happy to get into Android now and again, but I'm a web developer through and through. I work for this small company called Vernier, and Vernier is really a hardware company disguised as a software company because its actual name is Vernier Software, but it's actually a hardware company. We create sensors, we create curriculum, and we create software, and those three things kind of work together for educational purposes. And really, the kinds of things that we're doing are trying to make STEM learning easier for classrooms. We do this through K through 12 and also in the college or university level as well. So it's in the US, but we're actually international, and I've been doing this for about 40 years. So the software side of this has a lot of legacy. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk, because there's a lot of companies that are trying to get into newer tech stacks, but it's hard when you have a ton of legacy. So I'm gonna make sure I have my own notes here. The talk kind of comes from this tweet that I tweeted out, talking about 5 years ago. We went to Polymer, and we actually stupidly shipped production apps with Polymer version 0.5. And that was kind of crazy. But we went to Polymer 1, we went to Polymer 2, and now we're on this library called Lit Element, and probably many of you have heard of it, but some of you haven't, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. The cool thing about web components is that there's a ton of potential, and there's a ton of potential for all kinds of companies. Small like ours, which is less than 200 employees, and a software department of less than 15. And then there's large companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, who can jump in on this and get a ton of benefit. But the thing about web components is that they have an awesome story. It's something that's supposed to be based completely off of web standards, and we all, as web developers, love to hear that. But they haven't been received as well as maybe some of us thought they would be. And I kind of know why, because I've been there for a long time. I've been interested in web components since before Polymer was anything official, and I know some other people here have been doing it even longer, and there's been a lot of pain with web components. Me just saying Polymer over and over is one of the problems, that everybody has thought about web components as just Polymer. And in that tweet right there, while it seems cool, unfortunately, the web components part of that sometimes gets hidden, and people just think of this as a Google product. But really, web components is based on standards. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the goals of the talk, are there any native Seattle people here who also like soccer? Oh no, this is gonna be a really horrible slide. I'm really sorry, but it was the only time I could put this in there. Let's see if that works. Okay, so talk goals, okay? So why Vernier? Why did we choose web components? The problems that we had with web components. I'm gonna talk about the reality of working with web components, especially in the past, but the good news is that there's some awesome possibilities today. And 2019 is a really awesome year to start using web components. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can use them, what types of ways you can use them. We can build web applications, complex web applications, or we can build just one-off components that can be used cross-framework. So we're going to talk about that. I mentioned it before, but that's the company I work for. And these are some of the sensors that we create. These are Bluetooth sensors, and we have to talk to these sensors. So while I'm talking about web technologies, we haven't always been just out on the web. We've had to use wrappers. We have used Electron. We've used Cordova. We've used Chrome package apps, and we've also now used this new term called progressive web apps. So those are the sensors, and then that's the hardware side, and that's really the company. But how do students or how do people actually interact with it? That's kind of on the software side. This is just demonstrating doing a curve fit on some data that was collected from a force sensor. So don't judge me. I'm really not a designer, and this was a 6-year-old project, hasn't been touched for 6 years. This was the first product that Vernier created that was based on web technologies. And that it has, I think that's about 8 years old. The stack that I came into Vernier when I started, it was something that we're all kind of familiar with if you've been in this space for a long time. This is about 8 years ago, and the stack looked like this: Backbone, Underscore, and jQuery. So who's used this stack before? Yeah. So this is like a 2011, 2012, 2013 stack. This is very common, and it was chosen before I got to Vernier, but that's what I came into. And it was pretty okay. You know, Backbone, it was really easy to find anything you wanted about how to use Backbone for whatever you're trying to do. The stars in there because, you know, some people were using controllers, but some people weren't. And so you could kind of do what you wanted with it. Underscore templating, I don't really want to talk about it because it wasn't great. I didn't love it. And then jQuery, that's another one I don't really want to talk about. But the thing about those three technologies is they were super huge during that time. They were like, you could Google and find millions and millions of results, and you could always just type into Google, like, how do I do X in jQuery? And you would find an answer to it. The same thing could be said about Backbone. And you can see, though, that the dates on that, how do I write complex applications in Backbone? There's a 2012. That's like exactly when Backbone was big. So why am I talking about Backbone and why am I talking about Underscore and jQuery? Well, that's because it was a popular stack at the time, and stacks are constantly changing. So at Vernier, when I got there, this is what we had to write applications with. But I started writing ActionScript, like I think ActionScript 2 years before that. And I saw the rise and fall of Flash, and it was sad. But I knew that standards was the thing that you want to kind of cling to. Standards is what you always are going to fall back to, because while frameworks or ways of doing things come and go, web standards in particular, they stick around. And the awesome thing about web components and the story that we had about web components was that they were based on web standards. It was really cool to see how the support for all the browsers for the core APIs that make up web components in 2018 basically being almost there. But back in 2013, that was not the case. And while we heard people talking about it, it was mostly Google. So one of the things that I kind of have been trying to do is make people realize that the landscape of like 2014 and landscape of today is really different for web components too. But one thing is kind of the same, and that is that promise of standards still does exist. But developers, they really love their stacks. They really love the library or the framework that they're using. And that's cool. That's awesome. I'm not here to say that web components are going to take away your framework. But when you're a company, especially a small company who has a small team and a small budget to produce and maintain a series of applications, your stack is really going to be important because you can't always be changing it. So for us, when we were using Backbone, we kind of saw that stuff going away. We saw Backbone going away. We saw underscore receding, and there was a lot of problems with it. They were heavy, and jQuery, I think we had like 3 versions of jQuery that we were sending to the user, and it was kind of horrible. But I kind of think of frameworks of being, I don't want to say this is bad, but it's kind of like this. And that's, my dad's better than your dad. I guess this was a show that was a couple years ago that ran for like maybe 6 episodes. It's pretty bad, but I kind of like the graphic. And like I said, I'm not a designer, so I stole it for that. But you replace the word dad and you put a framework in there, and it's, my framework is better than your framework is a big thing. So when Vernier realized that they were going to have to start building more web-based products, we decided that we needed to figure out a library or a framework that was going to stick around for a while, because we don't have a lot of time to refactor. Everybody has to do a refactor. It's going to happen. But we were trying to minimize the amount of churn that we had to do and focus on features and other things like that, or producing new applications. So this was happening even during that time, but it got a lot worse after. But 2014, that was started rolling around, and Google was really coming out strong with web components. They, at Google I/O, I think it was Google I/O 2014, I think, and if I get my dates wrong, please tell me. I did try to do my research. It's been a long time. They came out with this idea. I don't know if you've seen this before, but this was one of the things that they talked about. Everything now was going to be a component. Everything was going to be based on these web components. And Google had this awesome idea that you could have different component types that did different things. And so when we were looking to move to a new technology, this looked pretty cool because of the promise underneath that we could use web standards and maybe just this light sugaring on top to make it a little bit easier. So in September 2014, that's when we kicked off our project. And what we were trying to do is just bring a product up that had parity with our native iOS and Android apps. And we only had 3 developers that could do it. And the other products had been ahead of us. They had a couple years head start. So we were trying to figure out how to do this quickly and efficiently and not with too much tech debt. So this is what we looked at, and they sounded great. So we decided to jump on and use web components. Not 2 of the devs were on board for it, but one of the devs was really interested in using React. So that's kind of important for the story, because you're kind of, at this point, we were kind of making a choice. Like, do we want to bet on this thing that's supposed to be web components, or do we want to, or web standards, or do we want to bet on a library that will likely be updated and have possibly breaking changes, but it will continue to evolve and get better? So why we didn't choose React at that time was really simply because we had been using Backbone, and Backbone at the time was kind of like the cool thing, and that when it was going away. And so there was a little bit of a fear that maybe React was going to go away. And this is only a year into React being out, so we didn't know kind of the power that that community would have. So we thought, Google's backing this idea. Surely every other browser vendor is going to jump on board and do that same thing. But unfortunately, that didn't necessarily happen right away. 5 months later, we did produce our first app, which was this app called Graphical Analysis. And it looks a lot like the other app that we made in Backbone, right? We're not designers, so I feel bad. But this was based purely on web components. It was using Polymer 0.5, and we shipped this to customers on Chrome OS only. We could do that because we knew that Chromebooks were really popular in the education space. And so a lot of our customers were on this, and really quickly we sprung up to a couple million users on this product pretty fast. So we started looking at this and thinking, well, we should really, when we were developing it, we should build it for all browsers, and that will make our lives easier when we go to flip the switch or figure out how we're going to do USB connections on Safari or on Firefox or Edge. But we bailed really fast. That's because those polyfills were really horrible. They just were slow. Even this app was pretty incredibly slow, and it was really sad. And I kind of felt like maybe we had made a bad choice. We had gone all in on web components. At least that's what we told ourselves. Because like any awesome dev, when you have legacy code and you have new code and you don't have time to rewrite all of it, you just put them together. And that's what we did. So we had web components and Backbone and jQuery and all the libraries running together to make this beast. This thing was also really heavy. I think this was in the realm of a couple megabytes or maybe more for everything that had to be shipped to the user. Wasn't great at all. But that was kind of our mistake. We had a tight deadline. We kind of wanted to show our company that we could make this web product, and I was really passionate about the web. And I had come to the Vernier for a 3-month contract to do that previous web project, and now I'm a couple years into working there full time. So I really wanted to push web, and I was really passionate about standards. But pushing something with non-production libraries is kind of scary, because if you think about my original tweet, we had to change and jump ship like 3 times. And that's not easy to do at all, because all the things that I wanted to avoid with something like React or Angular, I had to do anyway, because there were breaking changes when Polymer 1 came out. The thing about Polymer, though, is that at the time it kind of was, and I hope I get corrected by this. I'm hopeful that I can get corrected by Jan after this. But I think that Polymer was really the only library that anybody was looking at for web components, and therefore it became Google's product. And web components had this stamp that Google was Google's thing. And people were saying, oh, it's going to take over Angular. But the truth is that they were still working on trying to standardize this, but they just hadn't happened yet. So in that period of Polymer 1, when that came out, and Polymer 2, there was a lot of like sad days when I was thinking, I made a horrible choice. And my other devs are telling me, why did we choose this? So lo and behold, kind of out of nowhere, all of a sudden, other browser vendors started jumping on board. There were changes that had to be made in order to get everybody happy with the implementation, but all of a sudden the thing we've been building was called like Web Components v0. And again, we're building that thing that's pre-production, and we have in production code that is now going to be going away because it's getting deprecated even by Google. So that's kind of one of the mistakes that we made, that maybe we were too early to push production code with something that wasn't production ready. And saying it was standards based, if you really want to rely on standards, then maybe you should wait until it's actually a standard and not just a proposal. But it was really tough. It was working with buggy code and doing that conversion from Polymer 1 to this new Web Components v1. It was kind of horrible. It took a lot of time, and managers were really not happy with the quick jumps we had to make between v0.5 and 2.0. So it was buggy, and it was stressful, and it was hard. It was frustrating. It was slow, but it was also super awesome. I loved it. I was still a believer because web standards are going to win. And I really liked the idea that we eventually were going to get to a point where we could build something that would have essentially forever backwards compatibility. We could walk away from that product and then come back later, and maybe the library on top of web components had changed, but if you're not far from that underlying standard, then it's not that difficult. So we kind of stuck it out. It was difficult with things like Shadow DOM because there was, if you don't know what Shadow DOM is, it's this CSS encapsulation essentially, and it's really good at encapsulating your CSS, and it can be really hard to actually pierce into that Shadow DOM. If you have dealt with it at all, and if you've been working on this any period of time, there was this sweet way to pierce the Shadow DOM, and that went away with Web Components v1. It was, I think, the right thing to do, but it's really hard when you had written a lot of CSS that pierced the Shadow DOM to style all your components so that you could theme your web app in the same way. The reason why I'm talking about all these things is because that was the journey to get to where we are for Vernier.